Recently, a customer asked us if we could build a barn door for her that went on her closet door in her master bedroom that also matched the cabinetry that was in the master bathroom we had just completed. So the answer, of course, is yes, we can do that. It's just a little bit different process because you're actually building a door now out of hardwood. So we're building it out of thicker material than we do for cabinets for sure. The stiles and rails around the perimeter of the door would be 1 3/8 inch hardwood, in this case Alder hardwood, and the center panel in the door will be 13/16 thick Alder hardwood as well. So one of the fun things about this is that I've been turning this kind of project over to my son Ryan over the course of the last year or so. He's really come on as quite a cabinet maker himself. And so he shot all the footage, and we're going to watch over his shoulder as he puts this door together and go through the process, and I'll do a little commentary on what he's doing myself, and then I'll ultimately do the install of the barn door on the closet in the master bedroom when we're all said and done. So anyway, come along and take a look, and let's see how Ryan does on this project.
Okay, why is he stacking wood that way? I would never stack wood that way. If I stack wood that way, it would get in my way. Just kidding, he's just taken the first step of pulling down and prepping the 3/4 inch material for the center panel, getting it ready for the glue up of that panel. It's going to take 4 pieces of wood glued together to give him the width that he needs for that panel. Here's a quick graphic of the door itself and how it's going to need to be milled before assembly. The stiles and rails around the outside of the door are 5 inches wide and 1 3/8 inches thick, so that will pass for a standard interior door on a house. The only difference is the height of this door, which is a custom length to allow it to cover the trim of the door jamb all the way around from the floor to the top of the door trim. This 3/4 inch material comes from the lumberyard straight lined, which means that it has one true edge on one side of it that is cut at the mill, the benefit being that it can be run straight through the table saw without having to worry too much about the piece having a curve on that edge. It costs a little more to get it straight lined, but it does save time at the shop. He's getting ready now to cut slots in the pieces of material for the center panel, which are not so much for strength as they are for the alignment of the panel. You can do this with a biscuit joiner or with dowels, which will accomplish the same purpose, but we have a tool that is called a Domino Cutter that really does cut slots about the size of a domino. The dominoes essentially mimic a mortise and tenon type joint, but you can cut them in just a fraction of the time. He's gluing the center panel pieces together by adding a layer of glue on each edge and gluing the dominoes in place as well. As I said, the dominoes are functioning here mainly to align the pieces together so that they remain flush with each other as the glue sets up. That saves a lot of sanding later if all you're really needing to do is knock the glue off the surface and then do finish sanding before staining. The first round of glue ups gives Ryan 2 wider panels now that will be glued together to complete the final panel. Now the 1 3/8 material does not come straight lined from the lumberyard, so we have to cut our own straight line before we can begin running it through the table saw. And this little tool that I've had probably close to 30 years works really well to do that. It clamps to a straight board, which in this case is a piece of oak, and we clamp our thicker piece of material to it. Then by running it through the table saw, we cut a true edge on our board. You can tell by watching Ryan run material through the table saw that he is a pure lefty. He does absolutely everything left-handed. Now, I only write left-handed and use a fork left-handed and other precision kinds of things left-handed, so I don't really know what it's like to view the world completely from the left-handed point of view. With this material cut to size, Ryan is taking off the kerf marks now left from the saw blade, which we changed incidentally right after this project. You can see we were getting a lot of burn marks left by the saw blade. And Ryan is using 100 grit sandpaper for this purpose. We decided to put a 45-degree chamfer cut on the edge of all the pieces to add a little bit of detail to the design. That type of relief cut looks really nice. To get the slots cut in the perimeter pieces for the center panel to rest in just takes a bit of time and patience. We use this router and bit to do a lot of this type of work, taking about 1/8 of an inch depth maximum with each pass. By changing the diameter of the bearings at the bottom of the bit, we can increase or decrease the depth of the cut. Then by adjusting the height of the bit in the router, Ryan's able to create a slot that gives him a good match with the thickness of the panel. He's back to the Domino Cutter again, and this is the most important structural connection to the whole project. He's going to use a couple of dominoes in each joint. You can see how quick it is to make these cuts. The cuts can be made to fit very snug, or they can be cut to give you a little bit of room to move things around when you're fitting stuff together. But when the pieces are glued in place, I don't know of another joint like this that's any stronger, particularly with the amount of effort that's involved. There's a ton of sanding necessary when working with hardwood of any kind. Alder is kind of a rustic wood that has a lot of knots and other character things happening in the grain. Ryan's still using 100 grit sandpaper at this point to take off surface imperfections on all of the pieces before switching to 220 grit to do a thorough final sanding of everything and tighten up the grain a little. There's some old guy wandering around the shop looking for something he lost that I think Ryan's a little concerned about.
You alright with me cutting?
Yeah.
Seems harmless. Things start to get serious now when you begin cutting things to their final dimensions. You want to make sure at that point that you haven't missed something. This track saw is really a handy tool as well for doing this kind of thing, but for some reason I don't really trust it from a safety standpoint. I use it, but I'm always a little extra leery and careful. I wonder if that has anything to do with it. Anytime you're cutting final dimensions of things, it's always a good idea to check the diagonals. You may not have realized that carpenters are math geniuses as well, have you? You may be wondering why Ryan is staining everything at this point before assembling the door. The main reason is because the center panel is basically suspended between the stiles and rails that surround it. It fits so that it can have a little movement with seasonal changes and humidity changes. So if it shrinks just a little bit, having the full surface of the panel having been stained, we will never run into a situation where the movement causes an unfinished line of the panel to show up because it was stained after it was assembled. Staining everything before assembly takes care of that. We did decide to run a little bit of glue into the grooves. The intent is not to secure the panel because, as I said, we want it to be floating, but we just don't want it to be really loose either. The hope is that with just a little bit of glue, that will keep the panel from ever shifting around too much, but also will allow some room for it to expand and contract on its own. It's probably not necessary either way, but we did it anyway. Once you start the final assembly, you want to work at a steady pace and try to make sure that you have enough room to get all the parts together and checked for squareness before the glue starts to dry. This is always the fun part because you're beginning to see how cool it's going to look when everything is completed. Ryan's also taken a sharp chisel to clear out any of the glue that's squeezed up in our little decorative joint caused by the chamfer, and does the final diagonal check before moving on to the finish once the stain is dried. Shooting finish takes some practice and understanding how the finish is going to dry. I've sprayed lacquer for the vast majority of my construction life, and though I've always hated working with it because of the smell, it's a good product that dries fast and gives very good results. I switched to another product a few years ago called polyacrylic, which is water-based and the best thing I've ever run into. That's what Ryan is spraying here. Because it's water-based, you just have to be aware of the things that water can do to wood. It dries surprisingly quickly, though not as fast as lacquer, but the finish is definitely more durable, and I like the way you can build layers with it, particularly when you're spraying things flat like Ryan is here. The trick to getting a good finish with a spray gun is to keep your gun clean, drain your finish before putting it in the gun, getting your air pressure right, and keeping your gun moving anytime that you're spraying. One other little tip is where you have a panel and the rails and stiles coming together where there's a corner, like in this case, we always pay extra attention to that corner and give it a direct shot of finish before coating the entire surface. I found that if you don't do that, the finish sort of bounces in that corner and you get a rougher finish in that area that you have to deal with. Giving that little extra shot to begin with makes all the difference. I'd be curious if any of you out there that spray a lot have encountered the same thing. The rest of the process is just to add multiple coats. Try not to get too heavy with any single coat. Change the direction of the spray tip so that it gives you a good fan pattern for the direction you're spraying. After the first coat, lightly sand any rough areas to knock down the wood grain that's been raised because of the water-based finish. Blow off the surface with air, then keep adding layers of finish. I keep telling Ryan that he goes a little heavier with his coats than I think I do, but I'm not completely sure that's true. You can see it looks like the glassy surface of a lake and high gloss at this point, but once it dries, since we use a satin finish, here's what it looks like completed, and it's absolutely beautiful. Customers love the look. In the corner, I linked a video on installing a barn door on a master bathroom where I took into account a lot of the detail and the process from start to finish. The rest of this video, I'm going to talk about some questions that have been raised by viewers that I've really never answered, and also touch on a few things I picked up from doing a few of these now. At this point, the main consideration for me is getting the distance between the wheels on the hardware and the top of the door correct. The instructions typically go into this, but it's pretty important that you get the space within a certain tolerance to be able to slip the door over the rail with enough clearance to also be able to install the little bump guard that comes with the hardware, which keeps the door from accidentally jumping off the track if it's closed or opened with too much force. So take a look at that part of the instructions and make sure you get that spacing correct. Another question that comes up fairly regularly is people wondering if they can decrease the distance between the door itself and the trim around the door jamb. That space is mostly driven by the hardware, but here is one suggestion you can keep in mind to address that issue if needed. I could cut the sheetrock out behind my header board that I'm installing. If I remove that ½ inch of sheetrock and install the header directly against the studs, that would move the door a ½ inch closer to the door trim. Nothing structural is being affected by that. You just need to caulk that joint between the sheetrock and the header board and touch up the caulk with paint. When it comes down to it, it's necessary to do a little trial and error when installing the rail. The level gets you close, but you never know for sure how everything's going to work out until you put the door on the rail and try different positions for it. In this case, I'm putting in my 2 lag bolts in the center of the rail using the level, and then hanging the door off of those before drilling my final holes for the left and right bolts. You can see my first stab at it leaves the rail sloping a little bit to the left, so I slightly loosen my center bolts, lower the bolt on the far right just a little, and raise my bolt on the far left just a little. After I tighten up all 4 bolts snug, the barn door is operating exactly as I want. So there you go. I hope some of you will give it a try to build your own barn door instead of buying a pre-manufactured one. It would be a lot of work to do that throughout the entire house, but to do your own barn door for a few of your more noticeable areas of your home would be a nice addition. Thanks for your time and good luck with your projects. Hope you take the opportunity to check in regularly with Dobbs Workshop and see what else might be going on. Thanks for watching.